Hello, this is Dan Farisi, Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald. Thank you so much for joining us today for this informative webinar presentation. The title is Improving Your T&Cs to Mitigate Risk at a time when a lot of people are anxious about what's going on economically and perhaps with their businesses. We really feel like this is going to be an informative, actionable presentation that will hopefully facilitate you having a strong 2025 and beyond. We want to thank NSCA, of course, our longtime sponsor of this business series of webinars, as well as LIA Technologies. Thank you so much for sponsoring and facilitating this content being brought to all of you today. Just to give you a little bit more background about what the topic is, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the stressors that integration business owners are contending with right now. It could be shifting tariff policy, it could be elevated recession risk, endemic industry factors, shrinking profit margins. All of these things I know are weighing on integration business owners, but we really want to convey the message that you should not feel powerless. There are logical steps available in terms of T&Cs, project due diligence, financial management that can enable you to have a strong profitability posture this year, and we're going to get into all those details here today. We do, however, very much want to thank LIA Technologies once again for sponsoring this content, and I want to share a brief message about their game-changing PTZ cameras for higher ed, courtrooms, healthcare, and more. HETMA Gold partner LIA Technologies is bringing its new PTZ camera lines to InfoComm 2025 in Orlando at booth 4169. They feature superb optical and tracking performance and platform flexibility. And what really caught everyone's eye at ISE in Barcelona, where the company had their US team on hand demoing the cameras, is that you don't need expensive add-ons to integrate with your collaboration ecosystems. It's about getting the classroom or courtroom or any collaboration space up and running with much less hassle and lower systems commissioning costs. Thank you again, LIA Technologies, for bringing this content to us here today. Just some additional housekeeping notes about the platform for those who are maybe not familiar with the On24 platform. The console you're looking at right now can be completely customized. You can move and resize windows, making the video and slides larger or smaller as you see fit. There are also an array of interactive tools in the experience. You'll see, for example, a media player button for your video and for your volume, a Q&A box where you can submit your questions. Just use the widget at the bottom right of your screen, and we're going to get to as many of them as we possibly can at the end of the presentation. I would say we'll probably save 10 to 15 minutes for your questions, so feel free to pop them in the box as soon as you think of them. There's also a resource list, a downloads box you can click through so you can get the slides, any other related resources from our sponsors, NSCA and LIA Technologies. Perhaps most important is the survey icon, where you can click to share your feedback at any point during the session. Your input is extremely important to us and very much valued. Before logging off today, please take a moment to share both the good things we've done here and ways that we can improve for the future to make these events even more impactful for your business. If you have any follow-up questions or need help with your experience, just press the help icon and you'll get further guidance in real time. And I'll also just note you can expand the media player, which is located in the upper right-hand corner, to see the speakers more clearly. With that, I do want to introduce the speakers. We have a great panel here today that NSCA helped facilitate, bringing together people who really understand T's and C's and integration business better than pretty much anyone. I want to introduce Mike Abernathy, Director of Business Resources with NSCA, Eric Morris from Morris Executive Edge LLC and NSCA Financial Leadership Council, Dan Schmittendorf with Communication Company, people who really know this business inside and out and are willing to share all their insights with you here today. Dan, Eric, Mike, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
So with that, let's get right into it because we have a lot of questions to get to. And Mike, I hope you don't mind kicking us off. Do you want to just give us an overview of the situation we find ourselves in right now? Now, I would say is probably a great time to turn to those tried and true processes and strategies. Do you agree with me on that?
I do, Dan. You're exactly right on that. And before I get into that, just thanks again for the partnership with Commercial Integrator and SSI and our continued partnership in serving the systems integration industry. So Dan, thanks for that.
Thank you.
This is just an example of that partnership here with this webinar. So yeah, this is the time to get back to basics, checking your terms and conditions in your contracts, right? Daily updates on the economy are changing, right? Even our NSCA's economist, Dr. Keel of Armada, which many of you know and use as a resource, is saying, yeah, I'm changing things on an hourly basis as information is coming in. And with that is also the change with vendors, right? Vendors are, I was speaking with one integrator here in the last week or two, and they said they had a vendor that there were 5 price changes in 3 days. So there's a lot of changes going on and so forth. So that's just even more important with all that uncertainty, to get back to basics and to really start looking at your terms and conditions, looking at your dashboards and your key metrics, and ensure you're in line with them and not deviating from them. I know Eric and Dan will cover that even greater, and they have the infield experience to share that as well. But so with that is using, you might be asking, well, how do I do all that as a systems integrator? And there are a number of resources out there: NSCA, our Financial Leadership Council, our NSCA Board of Directors, and many others. We have worked together to create different documents and resources. One that we're going to reference quite a bit during this this webinar is NSCA's tips to reduce product risk, or excuse me, procurement risk. And this is a great tool. Just it's a lot of it's basic blocking and tackling and so forth. And we'll go over that here in a little bit. But also is looking at NSCA's 24 metrics, or financial 101. So key dashboards like, what's your revenue per employee, days of sales outstanding, and things like that. Also referencing NSCA's labor installation standard, our labor units. How long should it take to install a said device, whatever that device may be. And the last one that I like to reference is we have a go no go tool for looking at projects, high risk, low reward projects, or as Eric will say, as a walkaway mandate. And I know he'll reference that here in a little bit, but it's, this is just a time to ensure that your team is following all your documented processes, and it's as important as ever to do that. But also kind of a final note here I'd like to share is connecting with fellow integrators, right? Sharing ideas, connecting with your trade association, NSCA, or other associations and groups that can be a resource to with all the challenges that we're facing as integrators right now. Sorry, I rambled there, Dan.
No problem at all. I think you conveyed some really good information. And I think that the emphasis on kind of having documented processes and not just doing things in an ad hoc manner on the fly is really, really important. So let's move on to the next question and get even more into the meat of this. Eric, I'm curious what you think about whether integrators should be concerned with the volatile environment, even if they currently have a really substantial backlog. Or if your company is sitting on a solid backlog, are you kind of exempt from current concerns?
Wouldn't it be nice if that were only true? What for those of you that deal with long-term contracts, your backlog is your lifeblood. And unfortunately, we've learned the backlog can be a mirage. It can evaporate. And so what you want to do, and particularly in times that are turbulent, is you want to evaluate what your backlog is actually telling you. And there's a lot of ways to go about it. One of the first things I'm going to talk about in the backlog is take a look at it and see. I would rank it from the largest amount of dollars per customer in the backlog to the smallest. And first thing is notice on those customers that you've got a lot of eggs in one basket, or if that's the case, because we are in turbulent times, one of the first things you want to do is what are my terms on those contracts? Do I have a provision for early termination, or is there a provision in there if the job gets delayed? So the first thing is, when we talk about the quality of the backlog, is you're going to go and you're going to stratify it. You're going to look at, it's nice to say I have X dollars in the backlog, but they're not all the same. You want to stratify it. And another way to stratify it is by projected margins. And you're going to be, as you sit here and look at that backlog, you want to notice, are you layering in new work at lower margins, which if the economy turns, that's what happens. And how many of those jobs are dependent on one or two customers? How strong are those customers? As I said before, you want to also look at what are the terms. If something goes south, do you get paid? Do you have the ability to walk off? What are your terms? But this is all about doing this in advance. One of the things that I recommend, and I won't get too long-winded here, is something called a backlog burn rate, where you take your backlog and again, you stratify it and you rank it from the job that has the most backlog to the least, and then you schedule it out. And I realize the schedules are just estimates, but it's better than nothing. And what you're trying to do is say, if I don't get one more new job, what does my billing rate look like over the next 6 months or 12 months? And you're doing that by ranking each job and hypothetically scheduling. That's your burn rate. And someone says, well, obviously I will get new work. Well, that's true. But when you do get new work, chances are if the economy starts to go south, that it's going to take longer to build out. So you need to know what is actually going to be coming in. And when we talk about that burn rate, you also want to know, okay, I've got X dollars coming in and I'm burning through them at a certain rate, and it could be an accelerating rate. How much of that will I have and to cover my fixed cost, and when will it go where I won't have enough coming in to cover my fixed cost? You need to do all of that sort of thing in advance. And again, you're going to need help. And this is a participative, you're going to need your sales team and your project management team all to get together and kind of take a look at that.
So, Dan, I'm going to turn to you next. And as Eric made very clear, none of us is exempt from current concerns. No one can just look at their backlog or any other metric and say, well, none of this applies to me. I can just be on autopilot. But even so, would you say now is a time for calm as opposed to a time for any kind of a panic? What would you say your best advice is for integrators as far as focusing on controlling what they can control? We can't control macroeconomic factors really, but we can control what we can control. Do you have any thoughts on how the industry has proven resilient as well through the years, even in face of massive challenges like the Great Recession and COVID and whatnot?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. I appreciate that. To me, I say we should always calm. People make knee-jerk decisions and they never end well. So panic it will cloud our judgment. It leads to decisions based on fear and anxiety. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where I have to say, okay, it's emotional. We need to get back to the facts and figure out our next steps and what the logic is here. I think this is a time for us all to regroup. So calm, take a breather, sit back, regroup, look at your T's and C's to Mike's point. The NSCA put out some great guides around that. During the recession, during COVID, we went through our T's and C's and ensured that our language was there. And this was based on the information we got from the NSCA's guides. And we went through and ensured that our language was there to protect ourselves mainly from supply chain issues. So that was post-COVID as we were all coming out of it. If you remember, people had supply chain challenges just about every product that was out there. And so I think that these times are making us stronger as an integrator, and we're learning from each stage of it. But I suggest that we get back to the basics. We review our costs, to Eric's point. I think forecasting everything is critical in these times, knowing where your costs lie, and then overly communicating that with everyone involved. That could be the customer, it could be the manufacturers, it could be everyone, and making sure that you know what you're getting into. There's a great book out there called The Legal Wellness Kit by Chris Kiefer that gives some legal advice on your T's and C's and different contracts that are out there. Last year, we went through all of our contracts with our attorney and updated everything. Now, we negotiated every contract with different general contractors and electrical contractors, any bid work that we did. And there was massive pushback on it, but you got to stay true to it because this is your future. and you have to know what their costs are. But I would say that we've made it through the 2009 recession. We all made it through COVID. The changes that occurred as a result are real. People are feeling that personally. They're feeling it professionally. They understand where we're coming from. That doesn't mean that we won't get resistance if we push back on our terms and conditions and reprice things or do our updated on pricing based on shipping and different costs that occur. But you need to communicate that early.
I think that's a really important point, Dan. And I mean, one of the good things is some of the macroeconomic things going on right now. They're not exactly, well-kept secrets. Everyone's talking about it. It's on the news every day. Everyone knows what's going on when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to shipping, product procurement. So I think having those candid conversations with clients and customers and just being upfront, as you say, is probably the right strategy. It's not as though you're going to be telling them most likely anything they haven't already heard or haven't already read about in the news.
That's right.
So let's move on to the next question. I want to go back to you, Eric. Who would you say needs to pursue improved contract language? And when would you say is the time to do it? I mean, maybe I'm being presumptuous, but I guess my answer is probably everybody. But what would you say? You're the expert.
Well, Daniel gave us a great segue. We have to do it early and we have to do it often, and it has to be the sales team because they're at the front end of the process. And these are things that we want to have incorporated long before we get a schedule of values or we get a letter of intent. You've got to be talking to the customer early and often, and some of these topics may not be comfortable, but you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. You have to bring it to them. Say, we're going to talk about these things. We're going to talk about waiver for delivery. We're going to talk about shortage language. We're going to talk about termination language or force majeure language. But you got to go ahead and do it. Bite the bullet, do it. One of the things that with the sales team, it's going to be, you're going to have to, with the sales team, it's boiling the frog. If you tell the sales team you got to go out there and demand that we get all these contract terms, they'll just jump. But slowly, methodically, and common sense wise, you bring them into the fold, tell them, okay, we're going to work on this, we're going to work on this, we're going to work on this. These are the three things. One of the other things that Daniel said, and I liked it, he says you have to stay true to whatever your mandate is. And Mike mentioned it earlier. I am a great proponent of having a walkaway mandate, and we use those terms emphatically. It's a walk away. There may be a job that you are just dying to have. You absolutely looked at your burn rate on your backlog. You've got to have it, but you have to have the tenacity and the fortitude to walk away if it doesn't meet a predetermined criteria. Each of you have separate predetermined criteria. It may be something that relates to your amount of your supply of workforce, that if I won't take anything this large because I don't have the workforce to address it. It may be a style of work that you said we have never done historically well on. It could even be a customer. There, I won't name any, but there's some very large general contractors that are impossible to work for. And with a turbulent time, the temptation is, yeah, but this one's different. And that's why it has to be in writing. And I suggest whoever is the top people in the company, they reduce it to writing, but they communicate these are predetermined mandates. Mandates, you can't go around it. I don't care what, it'll be different this time. We've got a lot of fluff built in. We've got change orders built in. Whatever it is, no. We said that the mandate says we won't take that kind of work. And that's the poison that can get you quicker than anything. So it would be better to have no work or very little work than a job that just keeps digging deeper in the hole, like you can't get out of it. So those are some things that I think are really important. Again, to use Daniel's term, stay true to it, and do it up front with your sales team and make sure they understand what the mandate is. Other questions there?
Jump in.
Can I jump in? And actually, Dan Schmittendorf, I'm going to put you on the spot here about the whole, saying no to a project, right? And sometimes we as leaders are the ones that want to say yes, right? Because we're competitive and so forth. I got you smiling there.
Yeah, so I'm the worst. No, actually, I've learned from my mistakes. Let's say that. It's easy to exactly what Eric said just a moment ago. It's easy for us to want that job and to go, hey, we put things in it. We're protected. We have change order language. We have these things in it. It's easy for us to want that job. And I'm extremely competitive. So to my fault, I want to win all the time. So I'm a competitive person, and it's, we in sales, I think we're all competitive, and we want to win. And so you have to have that guide on what's the ideal job for us. What are our what's our guide to say no? And does this job meet our requirements? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then we have to be willing, to Eric's point, to walk, because it's a race to the bottom in some cases. And I mean, maybe you survive it, maybe you won't, but it definitely will hit your bottom line, and it definitely hurts. So you have to put that in place so you know what decisions, how to make good decisions. Let's say that.
So, Eric, I have another question coming your way, and it's about kind of the best approach for proposing revisions to contract language. I mean, I would imagine the average customer wouldn't necessarily appreciate their integrator partner just kind of penciling in changes to their standard contract on the fly. Is there a way to broach that subject to make sure that they understand your needs as their partner, but they're going to have their needs served as well? What's the approach, or the best approach, if there is one?
Well, you said a mouthful, because nobody wants to hear they have an ugly baby or an ugly contract. You don't want to start off by saying all the things you hate about their contract. What you want to do is use a philosophy. I've heard it called "and thus" or "and this." And if you see a contract and there's a clause in there that you can't stand, you don't fight them on the clause and say, boy, this is an onerous clause, I would never sign that. You say, I've read your clause, and I think that perhaps we could whatever. And there's a lot of resources. NSCA has resources. There are other organizations, the construction financial managers, the mechanical contractors, the Association of Subcontractors, that all have suggested alternative language. And that's what I would say to everybody is contractors and owners will be much more accepting of an addendum that modifies their language than penciling through it, and even in a way where they don't feel it's such a modification, it's just a clarification. That's another word that's wonderful to use. Yeah. Is if you go to someone and you want to talk to them contract language, don't start off by saying, I'd like to modify something. You'd say, I would like to clarify it. You may be modifying it, but in your mind, you're using the term clarification. So it's an and, not a but, or so we're not going to say, you've got a great, or this clause here, I can't sign it, or but we'll never do that. It's an and. Well, I've read your work, and perhaps we could clarify it by adding this. And again, use those sources. Another great source is your peers. Some of the folks may have worked, you're maybe in a non-competitive environment. They've worked for the same contractor in a different part of the country, so you're not directly competing with them. But ask them, were you able to get paid for surcharges? Were you able to get a contract that has price escalation in it? I mean, ask, and again, don't just ask your peers within the integration spectrum. Usually some of the ones that get the deals first, the electrical and the mechanical. So find out who's the electrical and mechanical in your job and say, hey guys, are you getting that 5% reduction? Or are you getting the 5% reduction to 50%? And that brings kind of another term is some of us, when we contract, unfortunately, are bound to a general contractor's contract with the owner because it says all provisions of that general contract are incorporated by reference. Well, incorporated by reference takes in a multitude of sins. And what you have to do, and you don't have to be bashful about it, is if you're contracted with the general contractor, say, hey, I've got to see your contract with the owner because I'm bound by it. And they'll say, well, you don't need to know that. Well, no, you have a legal right to know that. And if you're bound by it, it's part of your contract. And so a lot of times people, it's not only bad things that you're bound to, sometimes you're bound to good things. I know a lot of generals, they absolutely insist on getting that 5% reduction in retainage at 50% of the job, but they don't pass it on to their subs. So, I would suggest that you would do that. Another thing about reference is there's something out there called the consensus documents, and they're all of these organizations, NFSA and the construction financial managers, the mechanical folks, the electrical folks, the association of subcontractors. Well, they all huddled and said, we're going to put together kind of something that we all can live with, and it's called the consensus documents. And a lot of times those consensus documents would be a great starting place to offer alternative language. If there's a provision in there, let's say they say there is no price escalation, but you want to try to find somewhere there is, maybe it's in the consensus documents. But kind of circling back on this question is, you absolutely want to do addendums and you want to propose things. And when you propose things, you want to propose it in such a manner that you're trying to say, I'm clarifying, and propose it in such a manner that your sales team can sell it. If you have, if on the administrative side of your company, you have people that have these wonderful alternative language, but, they're not the ones to present it to the customer. Normally speaking, you don't want your CFO, your controller to suggest contract language because that's a hard sell. Your salesmen have to suggest the contract change and go, hey, we would love to do business and this will help us do it together. And again, it's a thing where you want to have them in the boat with you, not, both rowing in different directions. You want to present it. Can we clarify this so we can both get this boat to shore? And again, it's got to be a very soft sell, how can we do it? And I'm proposing clarification. There's no other way to say it. It's a sales job. It is absolutely a sales job. You can't force or intimidate changes to contract language. You got to sell.
I love that idea of the clarification versus the modification, because it does kind of, I think, de-escalate in some sense people's natural tendency to be defensive or protective. It's just a really good tactic. And thank you very much for sharing that. Very informative. So let's move on, Mike. I'd like to hear from you why you think it's important for integrators right now to shorten their proposal expiration dates, if you do, in fact, believe that to be the case. In the current economic climate, do you have a benchmark in your mind for how long proposals should remain valid?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's very important. And it goes back to, Eric has been making it very clear. And I think if we pull anything out of this webinar, it's communication, right? Communication, we're putting a lot of, Eric just said, we're putting a lot of responsibility on the sales team right now, but that's communication with the internal accounting team, finance teams, operation teams to get all that information and work together to sell that to whoever our client may be, if it's a GC, if it's our end user, and so forth. And part of that is looking at how long are your proposals good for? And right now we're recommending, it needs to be under 30 days. And this is coming from our financial leadership council and so forth. So with that is I'm hearing a lot of integrators. I think Dan Schmidt-Norf is probably doing this right now, is we're looking at, 14 days for a proposal to be valid, because things are changing, right? Things from our vendors are changing, like the weather here in Wisconsin. Wait an hour, you're going to get something different. So it's really important to have that down to about 14 days. Also, a couple other things to add to this is removing quick pay discounts, just due to the volatility that's going on, removing that from your contracts as well. And also, I think Eric mentioned it a little bit as well, as looking at your pipeline, but automate that pipeline report using tools like maybe, I know Dan uses Q360, Solutions 360. There's other tools out there as well. Eric, you're familiar with that solution. Is just continue looking at aging quotes, revisions, continue looking at your cost basis as well. And that's why, keeping those proposals to validation of 14 days or less than 30 for sure is a good place to start.
I'd like to add one thing to that, because when you spoke about automation, there's a lot of good automation out there, and Q360 has some of this. But knowing your day sales outstanding by project is critical during this time period, and that can all be automated. And the other thing that you need to be watching when we talked about the backlog, and again, this can be automated also, is what is the elapsed time from when you opened the job or put it on the book so that it was legal and you actually commenced work. Because as the volatility continues, the elapsed time is going to grow, and having that reported back to you where someone is watching it. In other words, you could have hypothetically a $10 million backlog, but is it going to build out over 1 year or 2 years? And so you really need to be using these automated tools to watch these things.
Before I put the next question out there, I just want to encourage everyone in the audience once again to use that Q&A widget. We already have some questions coming in, but we are going to save some time at the end of the presentation. If anything that Eric or Mike or Dan has put forth so far intrigues you, you want to know more, you want to dig deeper, please do use that widget. We're going to get to as many questions as we possibly can. The next question is for you, Dan. I'd like to know, would you like to underline why it's so critical from your point of view to ensure the proposals in flight are accurate, are up to date, are current? Do you want to offer any tips to our audience to help integrators protect themselves from margin erosion?
Yeah, so first of all, measure everything. To Eric's point, you can automate it. We use S360 as Mike mentioned. We're trying to measure everything that we can. Margin erosion is real, and it creeps up on you, and it happens over time. A lot of people think that they take a job today, it starts tomorrow, but some of those jobs might not start for 6 months. In a 6-month period of time, you have product price changes, you have labor changes. You could have labor changes in a year, and that project could start in 6 months and last for a year after that, or 3 months after that. So you have to be careful, and you want to forecast and measure everything so you know where you're at. I would ensure that that the T's and C's of your proposals should only guarantee a short period of time. To Mike's mention of 30 days and then getting advice on 15 days, I think that's something that's critical to put into your T's and C's, as well as language that allows you to change pricing or pass on pricing based on changes with manufacturer's pricing, as you mentioned, tariffs earlier, shipping charges, just different expenses that are going to come your way that are unforeseeable. Make sure you put that in there. Now, again, if you're dealing with a GC or an EC, to Eric's point, it's a little bit more difficult to negotiate those terms, but you need to stay true to it and negotiate them. And it might be use the language that is an amendment to, hey, I really appreciate this contract. It looks fantastic. Agree to everything in it. We just have a couple added items we'd like to add to it, and see if you can approach it that way. But I do agree that it starts with sales, and it is a sales tool. I've had this conversation and put legal in front of legal, and it doesn't go as well as if you sell it. So Make sure you do that. I would actively review your costs on a regular basis. Know your labor, know those costs, because if you're forecasting your projects out, you should know those costs. But when you put a proposal out there, in 360, we have the ability to flag any price changes. So for an example, if in 30 days, the customer comes back and says, hey, we're going to do this project, we can pull it up and look at it, do a quick review, and know that it'll be highlighted if the pricing's wrong on anything. And so you can automate that to know right away if your pricing's inaccurate and tell the customer, hey, we got to update pricing. Things have changed a little bit. But know that and make sure you cover that in your proposals. I would set up a process to assess project risks and then have that guide available. Does this meet who we are, to know if you want to take that job or not? Stop chasing high risk, low margin opportunities. We talked about that earlier. And you should know your labor capacities, know your capacity as a company, know if you have the resources to do it. And don't chase low margin work. There's too much out there right now. We have labor shortages. You want to walk away from a customer and be proud of the work that you did and have them want to hire you again, not the other way around. So make sure you stay true to that too. I would create product ordering guidelines from procurement. There's areas there where you can save some money, know when prices are going to increase, know when to ship product. Know if you have to ship a product based on price increases, check with your customer to see if you can bill in advance for it. Can you bill for stored material? Can you ship it to their site? Know those things. I would read the NSCA's tips to reduce risks. We put the NSCA puts out a lot of great material that covers these things. So I would definitely pull those documents and take a look at them.
Great advice. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can add to Dan there, if you're not familiar with any of these documents or so forth, feel free to reach out to me. If you're a member of NSCA, we'll make sure you get that. If you're not a member of NSCA, we can have that conversation as well, and get you the right resources and so forth to make this, this process and these changes and facing these challenges a little bit easier.
Thank you for adding that, Mike. Yeah.
One thing that rang really true of something that Daniel said is he said that you have a finite capacity. At the BLC I think it was about 5 years ago, there was a presentation about a company that every year ranks their customers from best to worst gross margin, and they fire the bottom 20% of customers. And it was a very enlightening presentation, and companies that do that, they're going to lose some sales volume, but they find out that those low margins, that they could possibly replace it with half the or replace the gross margins with half the revenue of those low margin customers. And the other thing that was said that I really never thought of, but we even had a nuisance value added to certain bids, is those low margin customers a lot of times take a whole lot more care and feeding than the high margin customers. And you would intuitively think that. But anyway, that was Dan hit it on the head there, is really look at your finite capacity and protect it.
Yes, 80-20 rule, right?
Yeah.
No, it's a great point. There's a difference between being busy and busy being profitable. And you don't want to just be busy for the sake of being busy. So I think that's a very important takeaway to bring with you. Mike, I want to turn to you again, just asking about the idea of calling out and itemizing surcharges. How can integrators protect their ability to pass along surcharges as price increases? Should it be done in a particular way? Is there a best practice just to make sure you're not having to absorb them?
Yeah, and thanks. And I'm gonna, Dan's already shared some of those points and so forth with that, but just ensure that you're getting paid for all the costs that you're incurring. And I think one of the key ones is and Dan briefly mentioned it, is request payment for any equipment that you may need to store in the warehouse for whatever reason, right? This was a big thing during the supply chain disruption and everything, but this prevents, this is probably a line that I got from Eric Morris is don't be the bank, right? This is the opportunity for you to prevent yourself from being the bank and letting your customers pay for these stored fees or warehouse fees and things like that. So I think that's really important. Something I learned last week from an integrator having a conversation with them is we were talking about price increases versus, let's say, a tariff, just using tariffs as an example, as a tariff pass-through, is from their logistics and finance practices and accounting practices and so forth, is they see it easier from a tracking perspective with their solution to just do a across-the-board price increase, and then you can always bring that price down if you need to, due to market things like that. But that's easier than doing a pass-through where you have to add it to every single line item within your within your quote, and then maybe you're shipping some now and shipping some later and keeping track of all that. So that was a suggestion from an integrator. I think that's really helpful in this as well. Eric and Dan, you might have a few things more to add since you guys are living this.
One of the things that I'd like to add is it's all in the language, because sometimes you ask for something and you're not using the vernacular that resonates with the customer. And it's funny because some of the customers will say, we will absolutely not pay any surcharges. We will absolutely not give you any price increases. And say, well, how about mobilization? Okay, yeah, I'll give you a little mobilization. You got to take what you could get, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I've been there many, many times.
So, Dan, another question for you. I'm interested what ideas you might like to share with our audience regarding trying to work your terms with your manufacturer partners. Would you say there are ways for integrators to mitigate some of their risk in terms of things like advanced buying, negotiating terms, understanding country of origin a little bit more thoroughly, getting commitment to honor registration pricing? Are there ways to work your terms to put yourself in a more advantageous and a more profitable position?
Yeah, absolutely. And a great question. Appreciate that. I would caution on buying early unless you can bill for early. We all have purchased material that's sitting in our warehouse still from 10 years ago that we never wanted to begin with, and we made the mistake of ordering it to save money and putting it in inventory prematurely. So I would make sure that your language, or one of the things that we did was we went back to our customers and said, hey, we can save money on this if we order it now, or we can meet the pricing that we put out there if we order now before the price increase goes up. But would you be willing to pay for stored material? And if they say no, then the next question is, well, then we're going to have a price increase, unfortunately, after this date. I would set the expectations. These are times to stay in close communications with your manufacturer partners and in communication with your customers. The recent changes that just came up. So the more communication you have with your vendor manufacturer partners, the better off you are. We had a lot of advance notice that there was changes coming. We had no idea what they would be. But when the price changes happened, it was pretty much instantaneous, like in the moment. And that's something that's very difficult to pass along. So stay in close communication with your manufacturer partners, and know what partners are offering protection through registrations, and then register those projects early and often. There's not every manufacturer that does that, but there are manufacturers out there that do that. Negotiate your terms with your partners, manufacturer partners, and see if you can get pricing holds for a number of weeks. And then reflect your proposals to say the same language. So if that's 30 days, maybe it's 30 days. If it's 15, it's 15. But pass that information on. We're always scared to pass along those price changes and things. And I think that comes from our past with customers where we had a little bit more wiggle room in projects, and we could say, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and absorb that and take care of you today. But today it's very difficult, with margins the way they are, to not pass along those costs. I mean, some of these increases are double digit, And there's people out there that don't have double digit in the project, so that could be catastrophic. So in summary, I would say over communicate with your customers early in the process. These costs are real and they impact all of us. I would ensure your T's and C's are up to date, allow for and make sure that they allow for increases in pricing and the ability to pass along additional costs, and negotiate terms with your partners. Use the tools that NSCA put out that Mike just mentioned, and look for other resources like I mentioned earlier that are out there.
So before we go to Q&A, I do have one more question. So I'll just encourage everyone in the audience to get any last minute questions into the widget. We're going to try to save about 10 minutes and go through as many of them as we can. But one last question before we do so. Eric, if you only had one tool to use during turbulent times like these, what would that tool be? Is there a silver bullet or something that you would point to as saying, like, this is the best resource I can have access to?
You absolutely hit on a subject I'm passionate about. About one tool, you would much rather have a cash forecast than an income statement. We know cash is king, but it's particularly king in turbulent times. And if you don't know where your cash is, how much you have, and when it's going to run out, you're going to get trampled. One of the things that is true to any business is never surprise your banker. If you're going to have a cash shortage or you're going to have a cash period is really tight, you need to be able to go to your banker early on and say, this is what caused it. This is what I propose to do, but never surprise the banker. And the only way to do that is to project your cash. And I know everybody looks at it and says, yeah, well, those are the finance guys, they always love their numbers. Well, I'm telling you that your production team, they know approximately how your big jobs are going to bill out over the next 6 months. That's the place to start. And you know, or should know, about what your burn rate is for your cash. How much does it take on a monthly basis to pay for your admin, to pay for your rent, to pay for your insurance, or whatever that is? That's your fixed cost. And you need to be on a rolling 6 or 12 months, whichever you prefer, but at least a rolling 6 months, where you add a month and drop a month, project how much cash is coming in. And the place to start on that is look at my billings, look at my DSO. How much cash is going out? The place to start on that is look at my fixed cost. And if your margins are about the same, then you can figure this out pretty well. If your margins are decreasing, then you have to build that into your cash projections. So as any kind of contractor, if you're doing long-term contracts, and even if you don't have a lot of long-term contracts, that 6-month cash flow is just about the most important tool you can have. I can't think of anything that would be better for you to know. Even your profitability is great, but profitability isn't cash. You can have a whole lot of accounts receivable that aren't turning, and you'll go out of business. So yes, that one tool is your cash forecast.
Well, thank you very much for that, Eric. And we'll go now to Q&A from our audience. And I can already see that we have way more questions we're going to be able to get to. So I'm going to go through as many as I can. I will just note that the questions are being logged by the platform. So there will be some opportunity potentially for one-to-one follow-up from our panelists for those who do not have their question answered aloud, just because, again, we're not going to have time to go through all of them. But let's start with the first one on my list. Bid specs often require us to hold pricing for 60 or 90 days. How do we get around that requirement and still remain competitive? Great question.
Eric,
I mean,
maybe. Oh.
I could jump in there because we do bid percentage of our work. That's a very tough question, because you are correct, and they do. And there's some bid specs that come out and say, we were dealing with a project recently that said that we had to hold the pricing for the duration of the project, and you can't unless you want to lose money. And so the second part of your question was the tough one: how and remain competitive. Because my first answer is you have to build in, if they're going to make you hold pricing for a period of time, you'd have to build in an increase to protect yourself. But I think that the only way around that and remain competitive, to your point, is get a hold of manufacturers and pass that information along and say, listen, this is something I have to deal with on this project. If we want this project as a joint venture, then I need help. And I need to be able to hold our pricing for that period of time. And I know that's not always easy and that's not always guaranteed. But that's a real challenge that we all face. And I see it more often than not that people just answer the question with, yeah, okay, we're going to do that. And they get burned in the backside.
One creative way I've seen, and I don't know that this always works, but when you do a bid, sometimes you're going to have exclusions, that this bid excludes this and such, which is a normal process in bidding. And sometimes you can put those sort of things in the exclusions and they won't consider your bid non-responsive.
Yeah, that is true. A lot of times we do that, is put in there the pricing is valid for only this period of time.
But again, you show it as an exclusion, here's the bid and we're covering everything, but these things are excluded. And if it's in the exclusions, usually they don't look at the, I won't say they don't look at the exclusions as hard, but sometimes they give you a little more grace on the exclusions.
So this next question, it's kind of more of a statement, but I think it might be a good jumping off point for a continuation of the conversation. One integration executive says, we've gone back to the manufacturers and asked them to deliver a price list with increases baked in rather than a surcharge. It has worked much better for us. Any thoughts on that comment from an integration executive?
So that's true. I think so as well, because it gives you the ability to plan for it. The challenge with that, or the risk, I think, moving forward, is that will never be removed. And so if they bake in whatever changes occurred, so tariff or supply chain issues or whatever that is, and they bake it into the pricing, that pricing becomes the new norm. And I would assume that once it becomes the new norm, it doesn't get taken away. Whereas if it's a separate charge, when things level off, there's a chance that just is removed and it's no longer there. That kind of happened with the surcharges that we all experienced. But it's 6 of one, half dozen the other, because if you bake it in the pricing, it allows you to plan.
I would agree with what you just said about you got to be careful with what you wish for. When steel prices went crazy, there was some of that going on, and what we saw was that the pricing wasn't when the steel came down, it went up rapidly and it came down rapidly. The surcharges went away rapidly, but the baked in prices didn't. So you got to be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, and I think we can all understand that, even apart from being in the integration world. If you go to the grocery store or something like that, yes, inflation very much has tamed over the last couple of years, but the prices are not what they were before inflation. It's just a matter of slowing the rate of growth or halting the rate of growth, as opposed to going back to a price that formerly had been the case prior. So I think that's a very good point. So someone was asking, and Mike, you might be well positioned to talk about this one, those additional resources, NSCA generated resources, downloads, PDFs for best practices and additional guidance. Can you just kind of reiterate how people can access those resources, whom they should reach out to, and again, the title of that document?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the best way is to reach out to me at mabernathy@nsca.org. Or just go to the NSCA.org website to find that information. And if you're not a member, we can have that conversation as well. So that's the best way to get those resources. And the documents that we're referencing is the tips for risk of product procurement and how to mitigate those risks. But also the other document is our financial 101 document, the 24 metrics for anyone with a P&L responsibility to follow. and then also our labor installation standards, or the LIS. And then we have a go no go resource as well, kind of going back to the walk away mandate that we've been chatting about as well.
Thank you very much for repeating and reinforcing that, Mike. I know we have about a half dozen more questions. I don't think we're going to have time to get to all of them, though, so I will just encourage all the other questioners. Your question has been logged, and if there's an opportunity for one-to-one follow-up with our panelists, we'll certainly go ahead and do that. But I do want to thank our panelists, Mike Abernathy, Director of Business Resources from NSCA, Eric Morris from Morris Executive Edge LLC and NSCA Financial Leadership Council, and Dan Schmittendorf, President and CEO of Communication Company, for joining us today and giving us really actionable insights on how to improve your T&Cs, put yourself in a profitability posture, and not just kind of be afloat in the economic sea, but really kind of take control of your destiny. Don't be in a panic. Don't feel as though you're powerless, because there really are tools at your disposal. And hopefully this has been an informative webinar just to remind you of some of those tools in your toolkit that you do have. So thank you again for being here, one and all of our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
And I will just, again, thank everyone for attending this webinar. Please do know you'll be able to access this on commercialintegrator.com, and I'm going to try to get it up on securitysales.com as well within about 24 hours for on-demand viewing. So by all means, please do share this with peers, colleagues, others who you think would benefit from this information. If you have not already shared your feedback about this presentation with the survey tool, please do it now. Again, we take your feedback very seriously. We try to make these as beneficial as possible for the precious time you're investing to be here. So please do share how we can make this better, and we review every comment just as we review every question. We'll see you back here soon, and thank you again for tuning in. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
You
Thanks.
too.